Thank you for joining us today on prioritizing security across the enterprise. We have quite a distinguished set of panelists, and I'm eager to get in to the discussion. You know, it used to be that product security was viewed as an extension of corporate security with medical device manufacturers. But as medical devices increasingly became smart, security scrutiny has increased from key stakeholders like regulators and the buyers of the devices. Without a sustainable, scalable, and supported security strategy, device security concerns can impact patient care, which we don't want, obviously. This has driven the need for dedicated product security priorities, management, and budgets. And so in this evolving threat landscape, we'll explore how different functions in an organization approach product security in the medical device field. And with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. So Brett, let's start with you.
Hey everybody, Brett Harris here. I am the head of cybersecurity business enablement for Siemens Healthineers. I have been in medical devices for about 16 years now, and in cybersecurity for 8. I was the product security officer for our cloud business, and most recently, the cybersecurity officer for our Americas region.
Great, thank you. And Chris, let's go over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Reed. I'm the Senior Director of Cybersecurity Policy within our Global Regulatory Affairs team at Medtronic. I've been with Medtronic for, I'm coming up on 4 years. I've had a couple different roles here. Before that, I was with Eli Lilly and Company for 22 years. I've been doing cybersecurity almost the entire time, but really got into medical devices, back in 2013 or so, 2012, somewhere in that time range. We were working on an insulin pump at Eli Lilly and other diabetes digital health products. And now at Medtronic, I get to experience across both diabetes and implantables and surgical equipment. So really getting to work to set the bar and make sure our products can meet that bar.
Great, thank you. And David.
David Scott here from Product Security Leader at Intuitive Surgical, working on both our embedded robotics devices as well as our digital products and services. Excited to be here.
Great, thank you. And I'm Sally Frank. I'm the worldwide lead for health and life sciences at Microsoft for Startups. And you may be wondering why I'm here, but I've been working with Medtronic for the last couple of years in our startup program and working with them through the Pegasus program. So really pleased to be here. And we're going to now move into our questions. So Brett, we're going to start with you. For your role as head of cybersecurity business enablement, it sounds like security has been positioned more as a value generator and not a cost center. What can you tell us about aligning security initiatives with corporate innovation? And how does your organization align and harmonize distinct business priorities with a unified security strategy?
Thanks, Sally. First of all, for those of you who don't know Siemens Healthineers, we're a large medical device company that makes things like MRI machines and lab testing devices. Most of these are connected devices, and for the most part, customers are mainly interested in cybersecurity regarding our connected devices. So let's focus there. Cybersecurity is definitely a value generator, and this has been a major transition in the past few years. Up until recently, as I was saying before, I was the cybersecurity officer for our Americas region, and it has been really interesting to watch this evolve firsthand. Customers are looking for partners to help ensure security of their operations, and our devices play a key role. Product security features themselves have shifted from a post-purchase checkbox to a pre-purchase requirement. So if your products don't have the cybersecurity features customers expect, then more and more customers are going to stop buying your products. Also, customers expect us as the medical device companies to be operating in a secure fashion and to prove to them that we are. So how do we align and drive a unified cybersecurity strategy across our products? I think this is a really great question and extremely important for the way we operate as a business. We at Siemens Healthineers have hundreds of products across around a dozen different business lines. And each of these business lines have their own cybersecurity teams and their own processes. So we've created a central cybersecurity organization that combines compliance and business support. Having this central organization that is separate from our businesses has been really great from a compliance perspective. It makes us more independent and also allows us to bring a strong top-down requirement and enforcement into our different businesses. On the other side, we recognize that our businesses need support also. So we provide these resources and tools centrally to support those business needs. Where those businesses are doing a good job in the first place, they continue to do so, and we layer on that governance on top of it. But where they need support, that's where we run these, strategic improvement initiatives and things like that. So our central group puts in place those, say, compliance pieces on top, which defines the rules. Then we run strategic projects to help the businesses implement those requirements within their own processes and things like that. And I would be interested to hear how this is done at my co-panelists companies as well.
Sure. Do we want to open it up? Chris, David, do you want to weigh in as well?
Well, I can jump in. I mean, we're a pretty large medical device manufacturer, so we have 16 different business units. As I mentioned earlier, stretching from implantable, heart rate management, pacemakers to, breathing equipment, all across the gamut. Each of our organizations has their own product security team, which I think is really important in an organization the size of ours. We need to make sure security is embedded in every step of the life cycle. But in order to make sure we have a clear focus across those organizations and proper support, we have a centralized product security team that establishes policy and expectations that all the business units have to adhere to. That group also ends up reporting out to even up as high as our board of directors. I've briefed them as recently as last year. And so we really do try to keep our leadership and executives aware of kind of where our focus is and priorities and make sure that we're getting the right support down to teams across the organization to make sure that they're both embedding security in the development process as well as responding appropriately to the products we already have out in the market.
Thank you. David.
So that seems like a very similar setup to what we have.
Yeah, agreed. David, did you want to weigh in as well?
Sure. One thing that I'll add to the responses here is, and we'll probably all get into this a little later, is with all of the shift, I would say over the last couple of years, not just with the FDA guidance, but here over time with vulnerability management, with disclosures and things like that. I think it's important to remember that one key element that our teams provide is helping the business communicate the value that we had mentioned earlier with the product security team, and we forget sometimes that value also comes in supporting the sales process, right, and communicating security to our customers, a compliance piece to that, and then of course going further downstream in how we manage the security relationship with our customers. I think those are huge elements, and having these teams allows you to focus on those things and get really good at it. I think there's a sentiment that that's going to get even more important as we go forward. So it goes far beyond building a customer security agreement and building products. There's a relationship there, and your teams have a very big part in driving that customer manufacturer relationship.
Yeah, so it sounds like, if I've got this right, that you all have this kind of decentralized yet organized approach to security within these different business units, and that that's a way to identify, promulgate best practices, and also help those that need a little extra help. It's really interesting. So, Chris, let's go to you. With this ever evolving regulatory landscape, how do you deal with the constant change and regulations, and translate those into kind of your product development life cycle for your medical devices? Seems like a big job.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. There's probably a couple layers. The first one is just, all of us are highly regulated, and we all have quality management systems. And one of the requirements of those systems is that we monitor for changing regulations and standards. So the real simple answer is that we have an official process that monitors, and as soon as we see those, we track, hey, this happened. We have to do assessments on whether or not any of our policies and procedures need to change, and we react to that. As you mentioned, though, things are changing quickly right now. So if that was the only thing we were doing, we probably would be reaction mode all the time, and it would be very difficult to keep up with. So actually, one of my responsibilities at Medtronic is to essentially we're actively engaged in a lot of those conversations in the drafting process. Helping set the bar of what's good, helping make sure we're engaging all stakeholders, healthcare delivery, regulators. It's actually an amazing collaborative community that we've got. I won't go through all the different organizations, but there's a lot going on. So one of the things I do is make sure we're in all the right conversations, and that as those are developing, we're communicating what's coming back to our organization, so that we can we've already mostly implemented the new expectations by the time they hit officially in that process I mentioned earlier. So I would say we definitely take a very hands-on approach of really being engaged, and then making sure we're communicating those emerging expectations before their expectations across our entire organization.
So you have to be yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sally.
No, you have to be really good at anticipating what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, and I think it's not so bad, because generally we're part of what the literal text of what's going to happen.
Right.
So that's pretty important for us. But I know that can be difficult for smaller companies. Obviously, that takes quite a bit of resources, but it's worth it for us, given the size of our organization.
Sure. David or Brett, do you have anything you'd like to add as far as any kind of processes that you have in place as well?
Yeah, I think this is a really difficult problem, and is getting more and more difficult right now. We're seeing a real explosion of regulations and certifications required. And one of the things that we've been doing is creating crosswalks across the different regulations and certifications. So we can really call out what's unique or what's common across the different regulations and standards. That's been really helpful. I think we're still learning here, and I think there's still a lot of room for improvement, because right now this is something that is really pretty arduous, and I'd love to see some kind of improvements, maybe at an industry level or something like that, where we can better align on what those requirements are. And so we don't have to individually analyze every new law, every new regulation, every new standard that comes out.
Yeah, I understand that. David, did you want to add something?
I would piggyback on what both Chris and Brett have to say here. And I would add that we're learning very quickly that, within my organization in particular, we have a cyber regulatory lead that helps us manage all of this stuff. To the comment earlier about resources, it's a worthy alignment, right? Because you may have cyber regulatory expertise within your regulatory org, but when you're talking about getting down to the nuts and bolts of the product level, we found that it's really helpful to have somebody who can speak both languages and help us drive a lot of that alignment and compliance. Because as everybody knows, one of the first questions that comes up when we do start talking about new regulatory requirements, new standards, is aren't we already doing this? Is this really new? Or is this something that should already be covered? Do we really need another investment? And so being able to answer those questions and communicate that clearly to your leadership, even up to your board, is critical to remove the sand in the gears, so to speak, in doing this job. So
yeah, well, that kind of goes back to Brett's comment about the crosswalks and, is this really new and how are we doing it in other areas, and is it applicable here? David, we're going to stay with you for just a moment. What aspects of your security journey have surprised you the most when you're trying to balance innovation with increasingly prescriptive security requirements? Was there something that proved more challenging than you expected, or anything along those lines you want to share?
Jeez, where do I start? Med device security is, to use your term, there are things that are a surprise. In a lot of ways, it's also Groundhog Day, right? 5 years ago, we were having these same groundbreaking conversations around patching and compliance, things that we thought had been solved, but continue to evolve. Thinking on my feet here, I think a lot of what we talked about today for our group and for me in the industry is a big thing, which is grabbing all these requirements, including the customer component, and how you're managing the customer expectations and the partnership there is one of the biggest things that we spend our time on these days. I'll put it like this: sticker security, so your certifications, your high trust, your ISOs, those types of things are one thing. Being able to drive that into your products, cover all your areas, which is your market requirements, your regulatory requirements, and then all of your security specifications. Being able to demonstrate that in a way that both your health providers and your leadership is comfortable with is a whole different ballgame. And I think that as we continue to evolve here, aligning with everybody in that stakeholder group on what acceptable risk really is, based on vulnerability data that we share, based on discussions we have within the industry, and how we communicate that, it is a big focus area, an opportunity. Let's put it that way. I always think about activities going on within a sales cycle where we're assigning customer security agreements, or we're working on information security agreements with customers, depending on the maturity of a health provider. You may get really specific, right? There may be very specific languages and agreements, both from a technical perspective, a response perspective, how much you're going to share and when, and keeping all that in line with your security lifecycle is something that we really have to focus on now with the new guidance on SBOMs and how we manage it, our vulnerabilities with regulatory bodies and with our stakeholders in the industry. That's a big thing. So we need to be better now than we ever have been at customer communication, transparency, all those things, the buzzwords that we were using. It's very real. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Yeah, I imagine kind of having a partnership with your customers to make sure that they understand the work that you're doing and why, and making sure they understand how you're safeguarding their activities is probably really incredibly important. Brett, moving over to you for a moment. Many of the medical device manufacturers actually rely on off-the-shelf solutions when developing their devices. Have you also seen this directly? And if so, how has this influenced your approach to security?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you have a connected medical device, you have off-the-shelf components. There's no getting around that. And while anything you add brings risk to your product, including these components, even the things that you write also bring risk into your components, so into your products. So it's not necessarily bringing additional risk beyond what you would develop yourself. Also, in a lot of cases, it's unwise to write your own certain security level features into your products. For example, none of us should be writing our own encryption algorithms or encryption libraries to build into our products. The experts have done an amazing job, and we need to, stand on the shoulders of giants, as they say. But that doesn't mean we don't address the risks from third-party components in general. And I think this has become, a very hot topic across the industry. The FDA is now requiring software bill of materials, or SBOMs, and that's brought a real interesting level of transparency to the insides of our products that many medical device manufacturers were not providing before. And I really see this as being good and bad. We've certainly seen so many third-party component or third-party software attacks or issues recently. SolarWinds got a lot of news. While not exactly an attack, but an issue, which you can see how how even a non-attack can affect your supply chain. The major CrowdStrike issue with, everybody's cloud environments and things like that. So when you're thinking about your secure development lifecycle, you really have to consider and evaluate what is going into your product. Make sure you know everything that's in there, which is not so easy to do, right? If you rely on people telling you what's in your product, believe me, you're missing things. So you've got to do, automated software composition analysis and things like that, just to get the information to be able to evaluate the vulnerabilities in your products. I think probably one of the most interesting things in this area, though, is what you do with that information. It is very, very helpful for us as the medical device manufacturers, because when we get that vulnerability notification, we can look into the internals of our product and say, okay, we're not using that feature where, we've got these other controls around it. In our product, it's not a risk. But a customer who sees that SBOM and they say, oh, your product has Log4j. There's another big one that, everyone has talked about, right? Your product has Log4j in it. I want to take it off my network. Okay, you don't have the full picture, right? You don't know that Log4j may not be exposed. Maybe it's only used for internal reasons. And so, again, super important for us as the medical device manufacturers, we've got to do that evaluation. But I think it creates a lot of churn on the customer side and a lot of worry where it doesn't necessarily need to be. Now, having said that, I think that transparency is a good thing, and I think the FDA requiring the information is a really positive step in getting all the medical device manufacturers to start producing them. But this is really a first step, and we have to see where this is going to go from here.
Thank you. So I guess Chris and David, do you also, I imagine, have off-the-shelf types of solutions that are integrated into your products as well? Would you like to comment on Brett's answer or add to it?
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned, no most of us aren't with the size and scale of a company like Apple, and even Apple's got third-party software in their products, right? So we're obviously pulling together lots of different things into our products. I think I want to just mention, both David and Brett have mentioned how important transparency is, but we also have a difficult situation in that medical device life cycles are not, consumer life cycles. We aren't going to update our devices on a monthly basis because, quite frankly, we can't ensure the safety of our devices, moving that fast. And these devices are delivering a critical service. I think the thing that we need that we're working through, we've kind of gotten through is updating your device important, but we're working through how do we communicate some of that transparency so that, I think Brett was talking about SBOMs. There's now tools similar to that, like Vex files, where we can share, hey, we've analyzed this vulnerability and we've deemed it to be non-exploitable, that we can share. But also manufacturers need to live up to actually updating their devices as we're required to by law now, a reasonable, regular cycle, so that so our customers get that confidence that we're really delivering and doing a good job maintaining our software. So it is a tough balance. I think the difficult thing when you're signing contracts, like David talked about, is a lot of times you've got IT security folks that don't quite appreciate all the layers of controls we might have put in place to keep a device safe. And they just want to see that update happen, right? But they don't understand that we have extra firewalls and other controls that their typical enterprise equipment doesn't have, because we're trying to create a resilient device that doesn't have to be touched nonstop to stay safe and effective. So we're really working through that process of how to do it. So yeah, it's a real difficult issue, but one we're leaning into and figuring out how to be transparent enough to give confidence to our customers, and for them to see that we really are walking the talk and doing updates as we need to and managing that risk.
Exactly. Yeah. David, did you want to weigh in as well? Anything you'd like to add?
No, that was great coverage from those guys. The only thing I would add is, we find ourselves putting a huge focus on the back half of that communication loop in driving market type influences, not only on the front end, but as we capture things from our time in market and with in market devices, really focusing on making sure that loops back into your development life cycle, and that you communicate that your development teams, your business owners, as a manufacturer, understand that, and capturing all that valuable work that we're doing out here to sustain in the market, so that you don't build it with those same challenges again the second time, but also increasing the responsiveness of that loop. As Chris mentioned, we're not updating on a nightly basis on these devices, and so when you do those updates, when you do push forward with a major change or major update, really adding a punch in there and adding value when you do that, so you're addressing those ongoing items, and having your external stakeholders involved in that conversation loop is important. So
Yeah, thank you. So Chris, we're going to go back over to you, and we've been talking about the pace of change and the fact that the regulations are changing, the threats are changing. What are some of the pitfalls about standing still when everything else is changing, like using past security strategies in the face of increasingly sophisticated threats, and how can organizations proactively avoid some of these issues?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, more and more, what we're trying to do is drive planning for the entire product life cycle and upfront. A few weeks ago, I was at a conference, MedTech conference with FDA and PMDA from Japan. And we asked Suzanne what keeps her up at night from FDA, Suzanne Schwartz, and she said legacy medical devices that really haven't kept up their security. And I think one of the things we have to do as manufacturers is making sure we're thinking through that whole life cycle. And I shared an example of I'm not going to go into detail on it, but we have a business that made a choice to use a consumer platform to deliver a certain device that really wasn't matched well to our device life cycle, and quite frankly started to pay the price of that. And since then, they had to make a design decision to pull that functionality into a specialized device, so that we could control the life cycle to what we needed. And so I think that's the type of planning, the adjustments we need to make. That may increase some of the costs, and that's the other thing we need to balance here is we're trying to deliver costs that, valuable services that aren't so expensive. So it is a tough battle that we're constantly doing every day, but the key thing is thinking through the entire life cycle and what that looks like up from it. Because if you're only starting to think about how you're maintaining your device once you get on the market, it's going to be really painful.
Understood. Was there something else you want to add, Chris?
No, I was just going to turn it over to hear if there were any other pitfalls from anyone else. I think that's the biggest one I see is not matching your life cycles.
Absolutely. David or Brett, do you want to contribute a perspective from your side?
I'm happy to. I think what's interesting here is that the attacks that we see on hospital networks and things like that are not sophisticated attacks. We're mainly talking about things like ransomware. And certainly we as the medical device manufacturers could be doing more to make our products more resilient against those kinds of attacks. But we're not talking about like advanced persistent threats using sophisticated attacks. We're talking about, someone sending an email with a virus as an attachment to it. So I think if we as an industry really want to stay quote unquote ahead of the game here, right, we just need to be implementing basic security controls. Like if we just all had, all of the basics, we would be in a much better place than we are now as an industry. And I also think that our healthcare delivery organizations need a lot of support also. They don't have enough IT staff, they don't have the budgets. And so it's really hard to implement, basic security controls, network protections and things like that when you don't have the staff and budget to do it. So I think, as an industry, like we should be focusing on let's get the basics in place, and then we can start worrying about, the advanced persistent threats and things like that.
Yeah, I love that. I want to add a little bit to it. I think a common pitfall manufacturers are falling into is not appreciating our customers and what they face. We think of our device as beautiful and perfect and look at the great value it adds, but we don't appreciate sometimes our customers are integrating thousands of these devices into their networks, and really thinking through how to make sure we're effectively using their time and resources. I agree with the basic controls, but I also think our devices need to be able to be resilient in the worst. We have something we say on the inside is your device should be able to sit in the worst real world network and be resilient, because you can't guarantee the hospital network is safe, and we want to make sure our customers have a fighting chance. And that actually goes back even my example on the life cycles earlier. Even the hospitals would get crushed if we had frequent updates. Because they not only do they need to sometimes participate in applying the updates, but often they have to these are safety critical systems. Often they have to do their own testing to make sure the update applied correctly and things like that. So these are expensive processes. So I think the pitfall I would even call out there is not thinking enough about the ecosystem and how we fit into it and how we help make sure that ecosystem is manageable, because it's a hard task. I definitely feel for the healthcare delivery organizations that have to integrate all this and make it secure.
That's a really interesting point, and we do consider the network to be a adversarial network when we're doing our threat and risk analyses on our products. But to your point, it doesn't just end there. You really have to consider the deployment and the downstream effects of your product. So like your installation teams, your service teams, are they turning on the security features that you're developing? You know, are they maintaining those in the right way? So if there is an adversarial network that, you know, it continues to stay safe in that environment, I think that's a great point.
Okay. Yeah, the blue was still on, so I wasn't sure you were done talking, but thank you.
Oh,
So
sorry.
yeah, were you still talking?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. David, we're going to turn our attention over to you. And as we are rapidly coming to the end of calendar year 24 and heading into calendar year 25, how do you think about, you know, picking priorities for future-proofing your devices? Like, where do you think the industry needs to focus over the next few years to better protect against future threats and ensure continued regulatory compliance? That's a long question, but hopefully it's got lots of interesting twists and turns for you.
Yeah. Well, we could play product security bingo here if you have your cards, and we could throw out all of the buzzwords, AI, ML, you know, all those things. But I think if we look at even the lessons learned over the last 18 months, a big thing for us, and I hear this sentiment a lot in the industry groups that we participate in, is supply chain. And I don't throw that out there again for your bingo cards, but you know, how we are managing not only third-party components that we're including in our devices as a factor of something that it expands our attack surface, it weakens our existing security, all those types of things. You're managing those third-party vulnerabilities. You're considering legacy systems and outdated or unsupported software. Not only your own products and your own product life cycle, but for everything that you are that you're integrating into your systems. You're managing that, and we have a very huge focus on both internal and external product life cycles. Really getting a handle on, I guess, what you call weak supplier cybersecurity practices. So there's a maturity level amongst your vendors, amongst your developers, and then of course going into open source or soup type situation, it's Wild West, and a lot of times your security teams, when you're talking about a life cycle, your security teams will and your software teams will sometimes unknowingly take on the burden of managing those components. And you're giving a customer or even the leadership a thumbs up on, yes, it's end of support from a vendor, but we're gonna, you know, in the case of an operating system or something, we're gonna maintain that. There's a lot of debt that could come with that if you weren't mindful in how you manage that software or manage those components. I think sometimes we have a lack of visibility or transparency that we really need to focus on. We've talked about that a lot here, but encouraging that two-way conversation with software vendors, hardware manufacturers that might be part of your own ecosystem. That's a huge focus and a huge concern for us. And then one thing that I'll add that applies, I think, to probably several folks on this call, manufacturers and providers alike, is things like, if we look at counterfeit or tampered or compromised components in our systems, you know, for Intuitive and for several manufacturers, we have instruments, we have consumables, we have other things that are part of that product ecosystem. and protecting those components from being copied or counterfeited or used in an unapproved way. That's particularly as we do global business, as we open our life cycles, that's a big consideration for us too. So I think that my colleagues here would probably have something to add to that one in particular.
Gentlemen, would you like to add?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
mean,
have a crystal ball. Oh, sorry. Chris, you go ahead. I'll go after you.
no, appreciate it. I would say it's always difficult to look in the crystal ball. So I think there's two things you do need to watch. But one of the things we're just emphasizing is, if you're not planning to be updating your device to respond, I mean, it's already required by law now, but and really planning through the life cycles of your devices, that's the number one thing. It will evolve, and you've got to decide when to react. There are a couple things that we're definitely got our eyes on. It's probably less around AI at this point, although obviously we're watching that. But there are things like, quantum cryptography, quantum computing, breaking cryptography that we're really starting to pay attention to, because those can be long impacting life cycle decisions, having to change our cryptography on our devices. We're really trying to think through how to phase all that in and react to. So there are some long-term problems we're definitely paying attention to and beginning to plan, because they take so long. And that would be my one quick example. It's definitely a topic that we've been talking through and starting to decide how to respond.
Okay, Brett, over to you.
Chris hit the points that I was going to touch on, so I have nothing left to say.
Okay, great minds think alike. So we have a question from an audience member that I'm going to share. It may have been addressed, but do you think that AI governance is going to play a large role in software as a medical device and future 510K or de novo submissions, just as cybersecurity has over the last couple of years for devices that are leveraging AI and ML?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I'm pretty close to a lot of this. I mean, it already is. To be honest with you, we've had devices getting approved by FDA for some time, and you can go out and look at the lists. So it's not a new thing, but there's actually more issues in AI that, and I think because of all the AI happening, and it's only going to increase the need to keep our devices maintained out in the market. Trends will change in our devices, how they're trained. We may need to update algorithms, respond to new things. But AI governance, I mean, there's a whole set of things that as you go to the FDA, you need to respond to, which is even things down to how do you make sure you haven't introduced unintentional bias in your data, and how do you continue to retrain and improve performance, or when you retrained, not backing off on your performance, right? So the good news is I mentioned that we're pretty involved in this space. Obviously, there's a lot of regulation. There's as much, if not more, regulation happening in AI as there is cybersecurity. But we're also getting some pretty good vehicles in the US, and we do try to push this out internationally. We have something called a pre-approved change control plan, where typically our devices, if we make changes, we have to possibly resubmit to the FDA, but we're basically able to describe certain circumstances we can make changes, such as retraining an algorithm and how we'll test that, so that we can roll it out without having to go back and get reapproval, which is a pretty big deal. It's been authorized in law. FDA's creating guidance on it. So, I mean, that's a long answer for absolutely AI is a huge area of focus, and it's going to be just as complicated, if not more, than cybersecurity over the coming years. I don't know if anyone else has any examples of that or anything.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I feel like there's a real lack of clarity about even what the definitions are right now, right? Like what I see is that everyone's thinking about Gen AI, and that's AI right now. But AI has been around a pretty long time. You mentioned machine learning in your question, and I'm really glad to see you calling out that as being something different from AI in general, right? You don't necessarily have the same issues where you're training an algorithm and then you're building that algorithm into your product versus something like what Chris was talking about where you're retraining on the fly within the device itself or within some kind of like connected system. So I think this is an area where, we're very new to it, and maybe new is the wrong word because machine learning has been around for a pretty long time now. But the idea and the concept of the way AI works and the way AI integrates with our products is really changing. And so I think properly scoping how we're defining these things and communicating them, again, back to that communication transparency, I think that is an important piece of that. And that's something that both like from a governance perspective and a regulatory perspective is going to really need to evolve beyond where it is right now. David, you're up.
Yeah, I think that we in our world, we have developed what we would consider to be a strategy and a charter or a plank, so to speak, and we have mapped what's going to be required from a quality system and a tracing perspective. I do think that we're evolving probably as quickly as we can, given the uncertainty and the slew of direction that's coming out. Of course, regulators are updating their policy and guidance. Government agencies are doing the same thing. And so I think that's going to be an interesting ride over the next 3 years. And of course, then there's thinking about all of the positive things that come into play, right down to being able to talk about how we use AI in our own security processes. But then I see looks like we got a question on that, so I'll defer that for separate speak here.
Sure, thank you. So the question that came in is, are your companies using AI tools in strengthening and defending your product security?
Sounds like you're about to answer that, David. Let's let you hear your
Yeah,
thoughts.
I thought, David, you were going to continue.
Oh,
there.
yeah, thank you. I'll go quick then. Yeah, I think for us, AI is a component of our tools and infrastructure, both for internal testing and dev, as well as protecting a perimeter for our digital products and services. And a lot of that is embedded with existing tools or services that we utilize. But doing that and then being able to effectively communicate it to regulators, to customers, I think that's the next step. So I'll defer here. I've had too much time. I'll pass it over.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in and just say, I think every aspect of our processes are going to be impacted by AI. The security tools are all working to figure out how they can leverage it, looking through vulnerabilities and helping us sort through and prioritize, maybe understand our attack surface better and just speed up the process. But it also goes even just in, analyzing our submissions we're doing for regulatory, all the processes we have are generally being impacted to some degree. I think it's still going to take a little longer than some people think. But I think AI will, in 5 years, things will look a lot different across a lot of our processes. And I think it'll be a better place. That being said, I think, one area that I think is interesting about AI is, I think the real value is that it can hopefully see the signal through the noise. But I also think that if there's just so much noise, to me, if a human can't make sense of it on some level, like I don't know how AI is going to like take your garbage and make it into gold, right? So there's still a lot of work to do to decide where to apply it and where we can really speed up a process or improve the quality of the data we're feeding and training with. I think that's a real thought for us to think through as we try to make things more efficient and speed it up.
Thanks,
Right. I
Chris.
think a lot of our tools already have, machine learning algorithms built into them. I think we've probably been using them for a long time now. What everyone is talking about, right, is Gen AI and how that's going to affect. And it's so new, it's cool, there's all these potential use cases, and it almost feels like it's, the next blockchain. And the difference I see here, though, is that, blockchain, it was this cool technology that we were looking for use cases for. And maybe we found a few, but, it never ended up really amounting to a whole lot. With Gen AI, it seems like there's a million use cases, and we're all just like rushing to try and implement something that uses Gen AI for those use cases and get the benefit out of it. Because immediately, like, there's benefit right out of the box. So to me, like, this is just like a really interesting transition from previous, new technology transitions.
So I'd like to, we're getting close to the end of our time, and I'd like to ask a question that occurred to me as you were talking through this last 45, 50 minutes or so. And one of the things that I was thinking about was the fact we've talked about customers, we've talked about regulators, we've talked about third parties, talked about the pace of change. And whether it's the AI or it's Gen AI or the strategies required for different threat vectors, how do you as individuals leading your teams stay on top of all of this? Like, what mechanisms do you use or do your teams use so that you are in the forefront and you are trying to anticipate what's coming next, or at a minimum stay up to date with what's happening, which that in itself can be a challenge. But I think about all the people on this call and how they might be able to learn from some of your best practices when it comes to staying on top of the industry and cybersecurity threats and remediation and things.
Well, personally, I participate in industry conferences. I think that's a really great way to see what people are working on. I'm a hands-on kind of guy, so, again, going to Gen AI as an example, when there started to be some buzz around that, I was like, okay, I got to get my hands on it. I got to try it. Let me run some projects with it and see what I can do with it. And I really learned a lot from that. And now, we're actively pursuing some of those projects, which I started during my experimentation phase. Also there's great news sources that kind of highlight what the current, top industry changes are. I think it really depends on what your learning style is and what's best for each person individually.
Thank you. Any tips from David or Chris? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that. I think the other thing I would highly encourage is just creating a culture internally where people are sharing what they're learning and where they're finding value. We're really fortunate. We have some absolutely, we're a big organization, so I'm just so impressed sometimes with the talent we have and just creating a culture where people share that. And if they see something cool, they or learn something interesting, they share it with everyone else, and it helps us because it can be hard to your point, keep up with all the stuff coming in. But when you start to have your better people all sharing interesting points that they've filtered through, and then not only that, for us, it's internal. So we talk about like what problems we might apply it to that we know we have. I think that's a super interesting way. So creating that culture of breaking down barriers internally between teams, not just your own team, but like how do you do it across your organization, I think is a really important thing to work on. And if your organization's smaller, figure out how to get, some audiences that are bigger that help you with that.
Thanks. David, anything you want to add?
No, great summaries. I think there's a force multiplier there in building your security champions. I think that's a term a lot of us use. For us, you might get a ping, you get inputs from folks that are two or three layers outside of the product security organization, and they're maybe not surveilling, but they're certainly contributing. Events like this, huge value for everybody to share. And then I would say there's even personal relationships in there, being able to call up your peers, whether they be leaders at your delivery sites or folks, my colleagues here on the phone, being able to talk to each other. We've made a lot of improvement in how we communicate with external stakeholders, with regulatory agencies, with other governing bodies, so to speak. And I think that's a huge positive. And then, of course, it's about an hour and a half of reading every morning to see what happened while you were sleeping. I'll throw that in. But I think we're moving in the right direction.
I'd like to add one quick thing there that I think you kind of alluded to, but I just want to call it out explicitly. I think it really takes being vulnerable in what's working well and what's not. It's something I strive, like when I talk about creating that culture, it's people admitting like, hey, this process doesn't work well, or this feels like a checkbox and it's not really doing anything. And I think the more we're vulnerable about, what areas we can improve and are honest about it, I think we can learn faster. And I know there's a fine balance of that. But I think it's true. If we don't really talk about the problems that we're really facing openly, we're not going to solve them. So.
Thank you. And thank you, all of you, Chris, David, Brett, for being here today and sharing your perspectives. This is a huge, it's an understatement to say how important this is for patient safety and continued rolling out of new devices and making sure that we're providing the patients best care possible. So thank you all for your insights and perspectives and sharing a little bit about your personal hacks to stay abreast of what's happening in the industry. So for those of you attending, thank you for your time as well. If you do have questions about medical device cybersecurity, our friends at Medcrypt are standing by and waiting to take your call. No, but they are available to help you build your strategy and make sure that you are staying compliant and in keeping with patient safety goals. So we appreciate your time today. Thank you very much, and we'll see you some other time.